All right, hello, welcome. This is episode 9 of EduVoice, and it's about 3:58, so we're just waiting for some people to join us and giving everyone a little bit of time to log in and click those links to enter the webinar. On the screen, you'll see a lot of information and questions. I'll go over these, but as we are waiting, if you want to keep yourself occupied for a little bit, just let me know a little bit about yourselves. I would love to learn about the audience that we have watching us today. So I have a couple of questions here. I'd like to know about your role. Are you a teacher or an administrator or some other role in a school? And maybe what kind of school you work at. So we have people maybe joining us from K to 12 schools, universities, private language schools, or maybe a different kind of educational institution. And because we're talking about building community, I'd like to know about our audience and how much contact you have with parents and people outside the classroom. Okay, so let me know. Just type that in the chat box. I'd love to make sure that the audience can hear what other people across the country are saying. Okay, and just to note, you'll notice a blue box down at the bottom that says to everyone or to hosts and panelists. Make sure that you are clicking or selecting to everyone, because I'd like everyone to be able to see your thoughts. All right, so Chung Vo Tan says hello to Mr. Andy and Mr. Mark. That's great. Thank you for greeting us this morning. Hello to you as well. We have another guest from Pathway School, which is a private school, so that's great. And another teacher, Miss Queen, sorry, yeah, that was An Vu from Pathway School, and Queen from Vietnam, and she is a teacher. So that's great to hear as well. Okay, if anybody else would like to share, that would be lovely. I'm sure we have about 20 people here. So let me know what kind of school that you are working at and what your role is, and if you contact parents at all. In my previous job, I, wrote things down, and that information was passed on to the parents. But I never spoke with parents directly. And at a previous job, there was absolutely nothing about my role that ever went on to the parents, besides maybe the scores that I gave the students. So there's quite a variety, and I'd like to know what kind of contact that you have with parents outside the classroom. Okay, so great. Keep on typing that in the classroom. We'd love to know what you're thinking. Just going to take a quick drink of water before we get started. Okay, great. So a couple of things to inform you. First of all, welcome to EduVoice. This session is going to be recorded, so you can watch it later if you missed something or you want to share it with somebody else in the future. But I would like you to know that it is being recorded. Another important thing to know is that you should not click any hyperlinks in the chat box that are not sent by me or the moderator or the panelist. Okay, this is a public webinar and you don't know the other people who might be posting links. So only click links that are sent by me or the panelist, and do not click any links that are sent by anybody that you don't know. Okay, so feel free throughout the session to share more with us about the kind of school that you work at and how much contact you have with parents. We just have another, Huynh from Pathway, from Vietnam, is saying that she works at a university, so not much contact with the students' parents. I guess that is to be expected at the university. So to begin, I would now like to introduce our guest today. I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Mark Robertson. He is the head of school at APU Da Nang. And let's give a round of applause to Mark. Maybe you can type clap, clap, clap in the chat box, or the clapping emoji. That would be really great if you can help me give a warm welcome. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about building communities in and out of the classroom. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about your role and what you do in the day-to-day?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this next 40, 45 minutes or so. I hope that not only you can learn some things from me, but I can learn some things from you, because it's all about creating great communities for our schools. Um, I'm a U.S. citizen from the U.S., of course. That's where my training and education has been. I've been in education for 40 years now. It's been quite a while. I've taught and been a school administrator in the United States, and also abroad. Most of my time in international schools has been spent in China and Myanmar, Indonesia, and now in Vietnam. And I've been a school administrator for well over 20 years, 25 years. I've led schools, private schools and public schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And I've also served some time as a district level leader back in Washington, D.C. My passion is all about teaching and learning. I still love to go into the classroom and teach and demonstrate those skill sets to my teachers when called upon. And I fully believe that it's my responsibility to help the dreams and goals of our children become realized. So I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
That's great. I'm very happy that that you're here, and I especially love that part where you say you're, dedicated to helping children realize their dreams. I feel like that's such an important part of what we do as educators.
It is.
Yeah, great. So it's really interesting that you've had all this experience all over the world. Can you tell us what brought you to APU in Da Nang in Vietnam?
Sure. Well, if everyone thinks back just a couple years ago, when the COVID pandemic was hitting everyone across the world, um, I was at that time in Indonesia, and my contract was finishing. My family's plan was to move to Vietnam eventually, and it was very fortuitous. It just happened that my plan was to come here. I was offered an opportunity to work at APU. I accepted that. But during that time, I was locked out of country during COVID. So I was stuck in the US for about 8 months. Finally was able to come to Vietnam when the country slowly opened. And when I first came to APU, I was principal of school of the elementary division. And then a short term after that, about 6 months later, I was appointed head of school for the whole kindergarten through grade 12 international school.
That's really interesting to hear about your story and your background and what's brought you here. And I think that is a good indicator that you'll have a lot to share with us on this topic of building communities. So let's get right into the content, shall we? Right here I have on screen, this is the social and emotional learning wheel from CASEL, if you've heard of it, right? CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And, it's kind of a trendy topic. I've heard a lot of teachers and teacher trainers talking about SEL. But most of the content I hear is all about what teachers can do as individuals inside the classroom. But CASEL is, talking about what kind of things we can achieve when we incorporate the entire community. So outside of the classroom, we can incorporate SEL into schools, school-wide practices. We can include parents, families, and caregivers, as you can see on the screen, and also communities. And what they're really talking about is, if we want to integrate this with our communities, we need to align our strategies and our communication. And I think that's what you have been doing. So I'd like to talk about how you achieved that. You talked about COVID happening, right? And
Yes.
I don't want to dwell too much on COVID because there are a number of other reasons why we might want to focus on community, whether it's, another reason that a school has to close, or whether there's some event that happens at a school that might be difficult that we all need to work through together.
Correct.
So when you started this project of building community, what was it about students? What did you notice about students that made you want to focus on community?
I've always had this fundamental belief that great schools are a place of community. It's a place where parents, students, and teachers work very well together um, around the strategic goal of trying to help every child realize their goals and their dreams. And so this is something that this notion of community and community building has been with me my entire career. And it first started my very first year of teaching. I remember reading a book that was written by a South African teacher during the apartheid era in South Africa. And she found it very challenging to teach her children because they were so there were so many things emotionally and socially happening in their community during apartheid that it made it very difficult for them to attend and to learn. So she started something, not in her words, but in my words, called community building in her classroom, where she would have every week her students would gather and sit in a circle, and they would discuss these things that were impacting their families. And the teacher's role was a facilitator. And each student's role was to bring possible solutions to issues and concerns that were raised. And so I took that upon myself to incorporate that into my classroom. And I did that weekly as well as a first year teacher. And one of the things I found was that it really strengthened the ability of my students to collaborate together, to work very efficiently and effectively together, to develop trust in relationships, to value each other's opinion and look at diverse ways of learning. But also it gave them the opportunity to take risk in the classroom, and kind of push away that shyness, because we really became a tight-knit family in a sense. So that was kind of the foundation of my thinking around this notion of community. But after that, and throughout the rest of my teaching, and then my career as a school leader, I believe that creating community is the foundational underpinning of what great schools look like. So I've always strived to try to reach out to my parent core, get them involved in the school, make sure that my teachers are also involved and my students are involved around whatever the vision or mission is of the school. But so that's where it started, my very first year of teaching, when I read this amazing book. And it's something that's always stuck with me since that time. I think that community building is really critical to developing outstanding schools.
That's really interesting to hear. Just really quick, could you remind me of the name of that book and the author again, so I can share with the audience in the chat box?
I do not remember the name, and I was looking for it today. I was searching and trying to find it. But the book was written in around 1980.
Okay.
And I just can't, remember the name. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I think that will be a fun research task for the audience. If they really want to know, they can search
Right.
Google for, books of that topic around that time period. But thank you for sharing that. I really like that idea of how you've taken, just discussing what's happening in students' lives, and that ends up helping them develop trust and taking risks and really just building a community. So my next
Yes.
question was going to be like, what successes from the past helped you know how to approach? But I think you've given that answer. But I want to think about someone else in your position now. What
Sure.
are some of the important questions that leaders might need to think about if they want to start doing this? Where to start?
Right. I think the first place to start as a school leader is to really understand um, your school community. Who are your students? What kind of families do they come from? What are the shared values that they have? What are their interests, not only in school, but also outside of school? And
Hmm.
as a school leader, it's critical for us to get outside of our offices, to walk the halls, to meet students, to interact with our students, to get to know who they are and where they're coming from. And the same goes, it's maybe easier to get to know our teachers because we have much more interaction with our teachers. I think that can kind of take a life of its own. But beyond just opportunities to maybe observe a teacher in the classroom or work with them collegially, I think it's also important to find opportunities outside of the classroom to get to know them just as a person and kind of how do they think, how do they go about teaching, why do they begin to teach, etc. And then as far as our parents are concerned, it's very similar. Not only getting to know our students and our teachers, of course, but it's critical to understand who our parents are. A little bit about their background, what are their dreams and aspirations for their children. Um, so that we can begin partnering with our parents in the sense of this community. But as a school leader, the question I would not only ask, how do we start from, where do we start, as you asked, but I would also say that the next step or the following step would be to understanding what our vision and our mission is, and how do we then articulate that to our school community, to those parents, to those teachers, to those students, so that we are all understanding what that means and we can all move strategically together.
Right. So it sounds like it's about getting to know them and getting maybe, especially in your context or for other foreign teachers, getting to know the parents and maybe dealing with some cultural differences or
The,
language differences as
right.
well.
The cultural difference is huge. I always, I was fortunate to be born outside of the US. I was born in Japan. So the first 5 years of my life were in a foreign country. My family came back to the US, but even though I was quite young, it made a major impact on what I believe and how I value diversity around the world. So I think it's important as a foreign educator or foreign leader to be very humble about the spaces and the places where we work. I can only do my best work in Vietnam if I can ask my local partners, my Vietnamese partners, to stand with me and let me stand with them and sharing in the things that we're trying to get done for our kids. I think it's in that sense, I think it's very important that foreign educators and foreign leaders are humble when they come in to work when they're an expat working in a foreign country, that they really see themselves not as someone who has all of this knowledge, but they see themselves as a partner and someone who's willing to share their knowledge with the local knowledge, and kind of combine those aspects together. I think that's very, very important to have that sense of humbleness and sense of, how can we collaborate together?
Sure. That is a very interesting approach. I think it's it seems so obvious when you say it out loud, like, see yourself as a partner rather than someone who's coming in to tell them what to do.
Right.
But it can be easy to miss that, right? So
It can be.
yeah, it was related to this question, who should be the driver? So if a school right now doesn't have as much community involvement as they like, who should be the driver? Where do we start and how do we start doing that?
Well, I think it's important that it starts, or at least the school leadership has a place in that, because if they don't support those efforts, they're going to fail. The school will fail. And so I think it's important that the school leaders have an ethic of community and understand what that means. If they don't, then I think students and teachers can help them understand what that looks like, kind of painting the picture for those who don't quite have that same vision, and then really encouraging them and supporting them to become, part of that stakeholder around creating community. If you already have a great leadership team within your school and they understand that it's critically important to grow your community and have your community, then I think it's their responsibility to reach out outside of their offices, outside of their spaces, and include student voices and parent voices in how do we build community. I think that's a very critical part of that. But once the vision has been established and we have goals already in place that we want to achieve, and we have partnership with our students and parents, and our other teachers and educators, then it becomes quite easy to accomplish that sense of community.
Sure. Great. So it sounds like, it needs to be this partnership, and leadership is reaching out to go beyond the classroom and beyond their offices.
Yes, definitely.
So, yeah. So another practical question I have about that is when you try to include student voices or parent voices, do you face any resistance from them? So maybe the students are shy or they don't want to bring in their family, or maybe the teachers don't want to give up classroom time for, whatever activities that you plan. How do you deal with that resistance?
You know, yes, I have faced resistance at various times in my past, not much, but a little bit. And you hit on a couple things. I think the second one was, the importance of time, teaching time in the classroom, and making sure that we are not taking that away from the important responsibility of a teacher. I think that needs to be addressed. On the student front, it's a little bit nuanced. It has to be addressed from the standpoint of how are students critically engaged in that process. It cannot just be a top-down, I'm the school leader, I'm the teacher, I'm the principal, I'm telling you we're going to do this, and you need to line up and follow, because you will not have much success. I
Mm.
think that the way that I've approached it with our teachers, our parents, and our students is to look for the key common element that we all share in education. And that key common element is helping every single student achieve at high levels and realize the future that they envision for themselves. That's where I start, because that's something that I know teachers will agree to, parents will agree to, students can agree to. And if I can describe how we can grow this community so that we can realize that dream, that goal, then I usually get 100% buy-in and everyone's ready to go.
That sounds great, especially when you have such a high rate of buy-in. There is
Yes,
a question I do want to address, and maybe if you have some advice for some teachers. So,
sure.
especially when it comes to parent buy-in. So I have heard from some teachers that it can be difficult to get the parents involved or interested or invested in doing homework. So, here I have one of our programs that you can see on screen. It's Reach Higher, which is, I believe, a similar book that you're using at your school. Uh,
Yes.
throughout throughout this book, we have a variety of ways to reach out to parents, including family newsletters and activities that students can do at home with their family. And in
Mhm.
addition, there are a little bit of, as a content-based English course, it's about literacy skills rather than just learning about one topic at a time. And we want our
Mhm.
students to practice these literacy skills with content outside of the classroom. And
Right.
many teachers have said to me, the parents don't care for some reason. The parents don't care about helping the students with the homework, or another reason, they feel like they cannot help the students with their homework because it's in English. Do you have any advice or suggestions of what those teachers could do?
I do. I do. Let me start with, I would say this. I've never met a parent who does not care about the academic achievement of their children. I firmly believe that all parents want the best for their child. Even when I encounter parents who are saying that, oh, I'm so busy, I have this business I'm running, I cannot come there, etc. Right? And I understand that. But I think there are still avenues for us to invite those parents to engage with us in the school. So let me give you a couple ideas. I think one idea is to firstly help our parents understand the courses and the curriculum that their children are studying. There are a variety of ways we can do that. Even if their second language, even if their first language is not English, there are ways we can do that. There are things that in some of my prior schools, we used to have a thing we called it Parent University.
Hmm.
And it was a place where our parents, they could come to our schools for free at no cost at all. And we would teach our parents what their children were learning. and we would teach our parents the style of teaching that was going on in the classroom. So as an example, at my current school, APU, we are an American style school. We teach in a variety of different styles. We teach project-based learning. We teach inquiry-based learning. It's not just very traditional rote memory, memorization type of learning. So we teach parents, what does that look like? We show them how that looks, what that looks like in the classroom, the type of questions that we're asking our students to respond to and answer. We talk with our parents about how do we expect students to collaborate and work with their classmates, you know? And so during those sessions in one of my prior schools, we had these trainings for our parents, and we would have people who would speak their mother tongue to better help them understand what was being taught. You know, that was just one example. Other examples I've seen are kind of more of a micro level, where I've had individual classroom teachers send home either hard copy, kind of kid mail, or a soft copy via the internet. They would send home to parents topical discussions of what was being taught. It did not need to be very specific that this is exactly what we're teaching your child, but in general, these are the ideas and concepts that we are teaching your children. And here are some questions that you can ask them, right? So it preloaded those questions for parents to ask their children. And again, because the children are speaking the same mother tongue as the parents, they can ask that in their first language. You know, it doesn't have to be English. A third way we can do this to engage parents is to send home with children a series of questions that they have to ask their parents about their learning to engage them. And then have the children take notes and bring those notes back to the classroom. They can earn credit from their teacher for doing that work, etc. Those are just three concrete examples, just really quick examples of how to get parents engaged. And I would say the last way I would say is I've worked in schools where I've had very little parental involvement. I would call meetings and no one would attend, or very few would attend. We didn't have a parent-teacher organization in the school. So in those schools, I did what was called fireside chats. I went out into the community. I asked parents, would you be willing to open your home and let me come to your home and invite other parents who live near you to come into your house to meet me and talk to me about what's going on in our school? And that's something I would do monthly. I would go to apartment complexes, you know, I would go to individual homes, I would go to recreation centers, wherever they were. I would go out into the community to begin engaging with those parents. And over time, I was really able to build strong relationship with parents and then began getting them into the schools where they can really see the learning that was taking place.
Wow. Wow. I love that idea of, you know, how actively you went out into the community to draw the parents in. That's really impressive. That's quite impressive. So that does kind of address maybe one of my questions I was going to ask, you know, because parents have such different schedules and commitments, how do we deal with that? And it sounds
Right.
like you've given us quite a few options of, you know, meeting them where they are available and giving lots of different options, especially with the teachers who speak the mother tongue being the ones who help them at parent university.
Right.
Yeah.
I would add one more piece. I believe it's very important for us to have open, inviting schools. A school should not be a place that we close the gate and we don't allow our parents to enter the schoolhouse. I think a school should be a place where we encourage and we invite parents to come in. If they want to come in and sit in the classroom and see what's going on in their child's classroom, we should allow that. We should have a parent center in our school where parents can come in and they can read different materials about the school. Maybe they can watch some brief videos on what the school is doing. It could be a place where they can come in with a group of parents in the morning and have a coffee or maybe a piece of cake or something. But I think it's important to have those spaces and so that parents see us as partners and see us as a place where they can come and enjoy alongside with their children.
Mm. I like that idea as well as having the parents involved in class. I worked at another place before where sometimes parents would come in to see the classes, and it was really great for them because they loved seeing their children speak English and practicing all the things that they were learning. But
Right.
my question for you is, I see maybe some teacher resistance to that. So maybe what would you say, or what advice or encouragement would you say to teachers who are a little bit hesitant or resistant to having parents watch the class?
Right. You know, I think it's important to not only hear what teachers are saying when it comes to them being nervous about that, because I understand it, I get it. Sometimes they might feel that, oh, this parent is here almost like a spy, and they're taking notes, and they're going to say something about my teaching. So in that sense, it's also important for me to help teachers understand what are the parameters of these visits. What kinds of things are parents allowed to do and not do? How can they engage with the children in the classroom? And of course, those same messages are communicated directly to the parents prior to them coming into the classroom. I think it's important that if we ask parents to come into the classroom to observe what's going on, that we provide some level of support to the parents ahead of time. Okay, Mr. and Mrs., you're going to come to our classroom. You're going to probably see these kinds of things. This is what that means. You're going to walk into an elementary classroom, and the first thing you're going to see after the teacher has introduced and welcomed the children into the classroom, you're going to see them sit down on a carpet. The teacher's going to have circle time. They will introduce the day. They'll talk about the type of weather outside, day of the week, month of the year. All of that is about helping your child understand, kind of where they are in that space, and then we're going to transition over here. So I think it's important that we have those conversations with parents ahead of time so they understand the space that they're walking into. And of course, make sure that we have some clear parameters around, the many things we want them to do, and maybe the few things that would distract the teacher from teaching. I think it's also important that when we invite our parents into our schoolhouse, that we let the parents know that we want to engage with them just as they are one of our students. So be prepared. You might be asked a question, or you might be asked to work with a group of kids, or you might be asked to maybe demonstrate a skill that you have, that you've shared with us that you have. So I think those things are very important. On the teacher side, I found that most teachers might be nervous, not because they don't want parents in the classroom, but sometimes just because they're just not quite sure what that parent's role is going to be and what they are supposed to do. So again, going back to what I said earlier, it's important to assure our teachers that here are the expectations for the parent who's coming into the classroom. Here's what they may or may not do. And I want you to continue teaching as normal, and know this is not going to be part of any evaluative process for you. So just relax as much as you can and enjoy yourself and teach those beautiful children.
That's great to hear. What I really like about that is, just again, the emphasis on how much the community is involved. It's not a top-down process. It's got to be you work with the teacher and the parents in order to make this happen, rather than just the administrator saying, the parents are coming, be ready.
Right. Let me tell you one quick story.
Mhm.
I'm sure all of the educators in this seminar know that usually when it comes to parent-teacher conferences or parent visits, it's always the mom. I mean, I just have to give hats off to the moms, because they're always in there in schools, talking to teachers, supporting their children. And dads, we have to do a better job of visiting our schools and seeing what's going on. So in one of my schools, I challenged my fathers. I said, listen, dads, we need more dads in the school. We're going to have a special T-shirt, and we call it Excellent Dads. And we want you to wear this t-shirt to school when you're visiting our school as an excellent dad, because we want to encourage more dads to come into the schoolhouse. And I challenged all of my dads in that school that minimally, at least one time during the school year, you had to spend at least half a day in school with your child. And so again, there are other ways we can continue to reach out to kind of expand that community. I think moms are doing a great job of supporting their children, being there all the time. But dads, I want to encourage more dads to be part of that as well. It's important.
That's great. I love that idea as well, and encouraging them to get into the classroom. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to talk about students now. And quickly before we go to this topic, I see that some attendees have raised their hands. If you have a question, you can feel free to type in the Q&A box, and we will address your question at the end. But for now, let's talk about students. So, right, the whole purpose that we're doing this is for the students. So what changes or improvements did you notice with academic performance specifically after you started this building community project?
Something I didn't mention earlier, and also part of my thoughts around community building has to do with something that you touched on as well. I've noticed that throughout my career, there would be these different events that would impact the schools, sometimes in very tragic ways. And what I found was schools, we just were not ready to continue school after something had happened, a death in the family, a suicide, someone having to lose their business. And, coming out of COVID, I thought quite a bit about this. I kept thinking, okay, how do we do this? How do we make this happen? Of course, I see schools focus very clearly on there's this physical safety side. Okay, wash your hands, wear a mask, stay a certain distance away from someone. I think we did a great job in dealing with the physical side. I think we also did a great job of dealing with the academic side, trying to get back to what's considered normal as far as teaching and learning is concerned. But the one area I felt that we have consistently been weak is in the area of social and emotional support, And when we came back to school this, a few years ago after COVID, talking with my teachers and seeing how it impacted not just our students, but of course our parent community and our teachers, I said, let's re-enter school in a different way. Maybe there's a way that we can at least have a dialogue with our students to determine, okay, how are you feeling? What has happened to you during this time? We did notice that the students were having a very difficult time engaging collaboratively with their friends, their partners, etc. We saw that during the online learning. I've seen that when there have been other circumstances in different schools I've been in. We come back together and everyone's kind of looking at each other, not knowing what to do. So I think that in working with our students, it's really important that we have time where they can express where they are and what they're feeling and what they need to move forward. It's not just you're back to school, get into class, start studying again. There needs to be a transitional time where we have these discussions about kind of where are you, how has your life been impacted? How has it impacted your friends and your families? What kind of supports do you feel you need to be whole again? And be this outstanding student that I've known you always to be. A big part of that is having practitioners in the school, maybe counselors or people who have that kind of background who can support students. And the other is, just having an open dialogue with students where they feel comfortable in sharing out what's going on. And because it's a shared experience, I think that's where we start and begin having those conversations.
Sure. Great. There is one question I'd like to talk about and related to practitioners at school. So what would you say to teachers? Maybe there is a school that doesn't have a counselor. Maybe it's a private language school where the kids go after school for 2 hours a week or something like that, and they're facing some of these challenges. What would you say to a teacher who's saying, I don't have any training in counseling or psychology. How can I support a student who's feeling,
Mhm.
who's feeling down or is going through some trouble?
Right. I would say that for those schools that don't have that level of support, I would recommend that that teacher contact the school leadership and say, I'm noticing that there are some students in my classroom who are demonstrating a great deal of difficulty, you know. Um, are there practitioners that we can invite into our school or that we can refer our parents to so they can get support for their children? I think that's important. The first responsibility of the teacher is to be aware and understand their students well enough to know that there might be a concern or problem. And then the second step and responsibility is for them to then seek help if they do not have the practitioners in your school by asking one of the school leaders to hand that off to a practitioner outside the school, and then also recommend to parents that they seek help for their children.
That's great. Thank you. So what I take away from that is, it's as a teacher, one thing that we can do to best support the students is just, as you said, be aware and understand when there's a problem. And I think
Mhm.
taking that first step is going to show students, how much we care about them and how much we're invested. And that might even do, a little bit to help them along with whatever trouble they may be facing.
Yeah.
Great. The last kind of topic I want to talk about is just advice for teachers and leaders who want to start doing this. So, if perhaps a teacher wants to maybe build some community, they don't have really the on full support of the leaders because it's a huge system, and it's just their idea that they want to start. How can
Right.
teachers, start to build some community in their classroom without the
Mhm.
full support of the whole
Right.
school system?
I Yes, a very, very good question. And I would say that the teacher would start at a micro level. So with their students that they have in their classroom, whether it's a secondary teacher who has multiple groups of children they are teaching, or whether it's an elementary children teacher who has the same group of children all day. I would start there. I would also then, similar to my um, my earlier discussion about what I did my first year of teaching, I would carve out some time where I could have discussions with my students just to get to know them and have them get to know each other. It doesn't have to be a discussion around a crisis or a difficult situation that they have dealt with, but it could be a question based upon, okay, what kind of hobbies do you like? What do you do when you're outside of school? What's your favorite foods you like to eat? And tell us a little bit about that. What are the uh, the customs within your cultures that you do? What are some of the words of wisdom that you value that your parents have shared with you, or your elders, your grandparents have shared with you? So there's a number of topics you can have students discuss as they get to know each other in the class. At the same time, the classroom teacher has to be vulnerable enough to share what to share and answer those same questions, right? So you're building that community as a very equal group of listeners, equal group of members. Um, that's something you can definitely do I would say at the beginning of the school year, when teachers are establishing their classroom expectations. There's a great opportunity to talk about, okay, how are we going to learn best? What are the things that we do? And I've seen many great teachers do this on a regular basis. They talk about, okay, here are my 2 or 3 expectations for all of you. Now, I want you to share with me what things do you need to help you learn better? And they can share that as a community to get to know each other at the beginning of the year. But having that time, um, that small amount of time on a regular basis to have these discussions around getting to know each other would be the start. The next part, moving deeper into curriculum, when teachers begin to teach students how to work collaboratively, which is a skill set. It's not just, I want you four to get together and do this thing. It's a skill set a teacher must very intently teach. That's a next step, that now that you know each other a little bit, here's a collaborative group that you're going to work in. There's going to be 4 people. Each of you will have a role. Your role will be this, your role will be this, your role will be this, and your role will be this. You're going to evaluate your group and each other individually. Here's the expected outcome, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and that also continues to build a sense of community. That's where they can start. And then, of course, if the teacher wanted to begin expanding that, they can look for like-minded colleagues who also have that that same sense, and begin discussing how can they grow that throughout the school. Of course, once it gets to the point where you want to then raise that outside of the school, you have to get those parents and those school leaders involved in the process. But you can start at the micro level in the classroom, and I think you can do great things.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, I really like those ideas. And I think my favorite part is where you talk about the teacher opening up and being a bit vulnerable. You know, if you're going to ask your students to share about their emotions and their feelings, you need to do that as well as a teacher. And I especially love that part about asking the students their expectations for you as well. I think that will go a long way as to not making the teacher seen as an authority figure, but more as a facilitator who's going to help learning happen and not just force students to learn.
Right.
So I really love those points. So that has been all of the topics that I wanted to discuss, and I'd like to address some of the questions from the audience now, if you like.
Sure.
Okay, so we have one question here from, sorry, I'm not very great at pronunciation, from Yim Tran. And they're saying, as Vietnamese parents, I would like to ask how you, as the leader of the school, may start connecting with parents in the school community. So do you send out a letter? Is it Facebook post? Is it you calling them? You know, what do you do?
Right. What I've done is to do a variety of communications to parents. During COVID, we did online groups once a month for our parents, where we engaged with them around a number of topics. Sometimes these topics were sent to us from parents, sometimes they were topics from the school. And then after that, my practice has been to work on developing a strong parent group. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't have a parent group, but you can still engage by inviting parents to things like monthly coffee chats. Monthly coffee chats can be ones where sometimes you have open agenda and parents can just bring their questions and topics they want to discuss. Sometimes it can be a very topical coffee chat where here are some things that I think are important for you to realize and understand. I do not speak Vietnamese. I speak very little. And so I would have someone with me, my assistant probably, who would interpret for me with our parents to make sure that we understand that. And also not just Vietnamese, because in my current school, we have a large group of parents from Korea and China, but we also have staff who can help support translation services for them as well. So that's where I would begin with that process and make that happen.
All right. So as a variety of communications and a variety of ways. There's not just one way.
Not just one way.
Yeah.
No.
And I also like that point where you're talking about you know, translating and making sure that the message is clear. That steers me to the next question. This is from Chung Vo Tan. And he says, you know, in Vietnam, there's a belief that if you letting students fear you is better than loving you, right? So kind of this image of a strict authoritarian figure. And then Chung goes on to say, I recently received a complaint that I wasn't fearful enough but friendly to students. So am I incompetent to be a teacher? And I think that, if you could offer your perspective on that, because it seems like there might be a cultural difference in what we're talking about and maybe what the audience is used to or expecting.
Right, right. Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. There are some cultural differences, but I can tell you when I began teaching, it was the same idea. It was like you have to go into the classroom, you have to be very strict and mean and get everyone to fear you. And then as the year progressed, you can relax and be much more amenable and more nicer to kids, right? That was
Mm.
the thought. I don't believe in that style of teaching. My great grandmother would always tell me, you can get more from people with sugar than lemons, and I believe that. I'd rather, I had a great um, mentor a few years ago, and he always said, Mark, we need to love and lead kids. Our job as educators is to love them and lead them, you know. Now, loving them does not mean that you're weak. Loving them means that you have very clear expectations, that you provide high levels of support, and you expect them to reach high. And you demand a lot from your students, but you show that you care, that you really deeply care about them. And I think if you follow that lead, there's no reason, you don't have to be mean. Strictness and meanness are two different things.
Mm.
Being mean is when you're doing something to sometimes very purposefully hurt someone. I don't prescribe to that at all. I do believe that teachers can have very clearly established expectations and with rewards and discipline for students, because all students, all young people want to be led. They want to know what they can and cannot do. They also want to know what the rewards and discipline might be based upon their choices. So I'm one that prescribes in the philosophy of John Stanford, who was my mentor, who said, love them and lead them, show them that we care, show them that we love them, maintain high expectations, provide high levels of support, but lead them towards being fully authentic and healthy young people and then later in life, young adults.
That's great. I personally agree with that, and I think one thing our audience might take away is that meanness and strictness are not the same thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can be a very nice person and not go out of your way to intentionally hurt someone, but still be strict with the deadline and enforcing consequences with that as well.
Yes.
That's great. So thank you so much for sharing. We've come to the end of the time. There are a few other questions in the Q&A that I think that we've addressed already. Should we be rigid with parents who are not helping their student? And I think probably you would say the same thing, right? You get more from people with sugar than lemons.
Yeah. Let me address that very quickly
Yeah,
with
okay,
parents.
sure.
I have, like I said earlier, I've never met a parent who did not want the best for their children. And sometimes parents come to us and they demand a lot,
Mm.
right? I think it's our responsibility as a school to really listen to our parents and engage with them around we have the same goal. We want this child to be outstanding person, successful person. That's where we are. That's where we meet our parents. And then also at the same time, help our parents understand what are the parameters around what they're requiring of the school, what we can and cannot do, as we still push toward helping that child realize their goals. I think that's the best way of approaching parents.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for that. The last question is there a certificate available? And the answer is yes, we will prepare a certificate of attendance. So keep an eye on your email inbox. We will also be sending out a recording of this so you can watch it again later, and you can share it with your colleagues if you would like to do that as well. Okay, so thank you so much. I just want to wrap up with a couple of things and summarize what we talked about. So again, I talked about, social emotional learning because it's a trendy topic right now, and they really stress the importance of community. And our guest here is an expert in building communities, and he has shared with us many tips for teachers and school leaders about what we can do. So if you want to learn more about social emotional learning and the role that community building has to play in that, then I definitely recommend that you visit this website. It's casel.org, CASEL.org. Another thing I'll mention is that I showed some excerpts of materials from one of our coursebook series called Reach Higher. It's a language and literacy program and a bit of content-based English. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, you can search it on the internet. You can also follow us on Facebook if you want to learn about more webinars or events that we do, and especially the next episode of EduVoice that we will be hosting. So you can find us on Facebook. It's National Geographic Learning Vietnam. And maybe there's one last thing that I wanted to show you. Let's see if that will present. Okay, so this is, this is Reach Higher. And as you can see, there are many ways where we can get students to do some activities in school and out of school. This is the page where if you'd like to learn more about Reach Higher, you can scan this code or type this URL into your browser. It's bit.ly/reachhigherngl, and pay attention to those capital letters because it is case sensitive. That's bit.ly/reachhigherngl. I'll leave that on screen for a couple of moments. And just to close out, I want to again thank our guest here, Mark Robertson. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expert opinion and your experience with how you've built communities. I think it's really full of lots of useful advice for individual teachers, as well as school leaders like principals or deans or course coordinators about what they can do to help build community as a whole. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we say goodbye?
I just want to thank everyone for attending. Just keep loving and leading those kids and make things happen. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great. I'm just going to repeat that again. Thanks so much for sharing. Keep loving and leading those kids. Thank you so much. And we'll see you on our next episode. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.